Okay, one of the things that as we go along, we look at the gallery. I think one of the most common things, that I see that people have trouble with is sanding. It's a very basic part of wood turning. You put all your time into turning that piece, and then people go quickly and leave a bunch of tool marks behind or sanding marks after they've done it, and it's what everybody looks at and sees. And you just go, gosh, a few more minutes of time spent on sanding would make pieces so much nicer. And it really isn't, you got probably half the time in already because you sanded some, that to go a little further, it would be, worth your effort. But what I'm wondering is if we should run dust collection or not. It'd probably be a good idea. Even though it's going to be noisy. Does that
not reach?
I don't know if it'll reach. It is. This is one of the things, I don't know if you've all seen this. Pete came up with this. I think it was in the journal or something, but a good way to hang a 4-inch hose and get it where you're sanding. So simple to have it there and hanging. We used to have these big boxes that the hose would connect on the back of it, but it was such a big area that you lost all your suction from your hose. And this is a much nicer way to get it where you want it and have the hose right there and get good draft with it working. But when I start out a bowl on the lathe, I do my first few grits of sandpaper in a regular drill, and I'm working on the lathe. So I try, what we got here? Oh, that helps.
All else failed.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. There we go. But what I try to do, and let's see if we can still hear once this thing is running. Can you hear anything when I talk? Okay. So what I'm trying to do, drives me nuts. So all I'm trying to do is control the sander. I don't know if you've ever had where you're sanding and all of a sudden the sander's whipping around. When you lose control of the sander, you go skating around like that, you're actually creating big scratches in your work. So I really come in and really control this thing. A lot of times what I do, so I don't have the lathe running, put my arm up against it and control the rotation because the drill wants to spin it. But I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the sandpaper. That's the key, is you allow the paper to work by not pushing hard, and it's going to cut off the surface. The harder you push, those errant large grit are just going to put scratches in your bowl, and that is the hard. It's just harder and harder. The more you push, it's counterproductive. It isn't going to get you there quicker. It's actually going to make it worse, and you put deep scratches in that you can't get rid of. So as I'm controlling this thing going around, I don't stop in one place. I keep moving, keep the sander moving, let the bowl rotate a little bit. Say what? 80 grit. I start, it's rare that I do a piece where I don't use my 80 grit. And it's just one of those things is you like to think that you're a better turner and you can you can get away with starting with a 220 or 400. I remember one guy telling me once that he said, I start with 400. And I'm going, it must take you a long time to sand. It's, so what I do is once you get done, if you run the lathe for a while, turn it off, then start picking your spots. And usually what you're looking at is most likely end grain is the last thing to stand away. Then I put pressure on here and stop the bowl from turning so much. And go in. Let's see. But you can tell in that little bit of sanding how much already I've eliminated a lot of tool marks. So, and I do not move away from the 80 grit paper until I can't see any tool marks. It is one of those things is that, you know, they aren't going to go away faster once you go to 100 and then 120. Stick with the 80. This one is your workhorse. This one does, it eliminates material faster than anything else. And then move on to the next grit where all you're doing is removing the scratches from this paper, not tool marks.
Do you create low spots in there then from working at, say, the end grain or one spot too much?
Well, that you got it. I do always keep trying to move. I try not to sit in one place long, and yeah, I'm not going to sit a long time. You got to remember your end grain sands so slowly because the fibers, you're standing right at the end of the fibers. Whereas you get around to the side grain here, so this cuts easily. Right at the end of the fibers, it's cutting slowly. So even though you spend more time sanding on the end grain, you're actually probably taking off less material. And it's why it's so difficult to get those marks to go away on your end grain. So same with on the outside, I'll run it for a while on as low a speed, as slow as I can get this thing to run. That's where I want to be sanding. And I always say, I'd rather see high spots and ridges that'll sand off easily in comparison to tear out. Tear out, you've got to sand the area around there to get to the bottom of the tear out. So a ridge, a little tool mark that gets left behind sands away quickly, easily, not a problem. Tear out is kind of the worst case scenario. That's one of the reasons that I don't use scrapers a lot. If you're coming in and using a scraper, you should learn how to put a nice burr on the edge so they're sharp. Because a lot of scrapers, if you don't have them sharp, you're creating more tear out than it's worth even getting that tool out for. I've seen people do more damage with them just because they don't use them correctly or they aren't sharp. They're dull. They're going in and it's tearing fibers out rather than cutting them off. So scrapers are really meant to be used as more of a finishing tool, in my opinion. I mean, you can do a lot of hollowing with one also, but in the end, you're gonna have to sharpen, get a good burr on, then come in and do a finish cut with them. And that way you can, not have that tear out happening. But say it's common that I think people just are in too much of a hurry. I don't, people don't believe me when I say this. I really don't. I'm not a production turner. It would be nice if you could go in and do a lot of turning quickly and stuff. The what's his name? Mike, the bull turner that's so famous. Mahoney, yep. You know, it takes him a few minutes to turn a bull, but you know that he does that turning and then he hands it off to someone else that does all his finishing. He doesn't even do it himself, you know, so it's a little bit of a, well, once you get to be a big name, you can get away with that stuff, but I'm still doing all my own finishing, so. So then I work my way up, and I'm not going to go through sanding all the way on this or anything because it does. I tend to spend time. I don't worry about time. Just that's what I was just getting at is, it is one of those things that to me, I just time is irrelevant. I enjoy my time at the lathe and working here. So to be always concerned about time to me is why. If I'm going to have to worry about my time all the time when I'm at the lathe, I'm going to find something else to do. I enjoy my time working on the things that I make, and that is why. So if you're in a hurry, I don't understand it. It doesn't work for me to be so concerned about how much time it takes me to do things all the time. So, but.
Does it matter what way the rotation is on the drill?
Yep, it's one of those things. Again, it depends on who you talk to. Some people say you gotta reverse it, you know, and sand backwards, forwards, and up and down. I don't think it matters, personally. There's some things where you get wild green and it's running all different directions, it may help, but I think just taking, like say, slowing down. Heat is one of the biggest things. If you're pushing hard on your paper, you're causing a heat buildup from the friction. That can actually cause all kinds of little checking to happen in the wood. If there's any moisture in the wood, it happens pretty bad and happens quickly. It's one of those things that, like I say, it just isn't a concern to me. I had brought in a few different, I go through the grits, I get to about 100, 120, then I go to pneumatic sanders. And I got 5-inch, 3-inch, and 2-inch. Now these are random orbit. I like pneumatic sanders. I think the only one that I ever broke, and I sent it back to the company to be repaired, was my own fault. I put it together wrong. Once I had taken it apart and thought I could fix it myself, and it didn't go well. But I do. I like the random orbit, and once I get down on a bowl, I only go to 150 grit. I don't sand any further. I get my first coat on, because they say as you get to higher grits, you're actually burnishing the surface.
You mean utilitarian?
Utilitarian bowls, yep. So functional, I want my finish to be a part of the wood. That's my whole thing with finishes on utilitarian pieces, is that I don't want the finish on the surface of the wood, I want it in the wood. So I am generally using some kind of a penetrating finish. I don't use lacquer on utilitarian bowls. Once you get that first coat on there, I let it soak for about half an hour at least, where it's literally dripping off of there wet. And then I wipe the surface off. Let it sit for at least a week to dry before I go to the next. Now your wood is sealed. You can sand to your heart's content. If you want to go to 400 or something, go ahead. But utilitarian bowl, to me, it gets a nice light sanding, and I'll put another coat on, put it on, wipe it off, it's done. And it's that first coat that's the most important. I don't worry about it. I figure people are using these, they're using utensils in there, it's sitting in dishwater. Why go to a gallery finish and trying to get something that's perfect when it's meant to be used, you know, and so I just don't do that. So I'm not a believer. If you want to, though, there is nothing saying you can't do it. There is tons of, probably when it comes to sanding, after you know, what I spend my most money on my turning tools, I would say sanding is second for where I invest money into. And this thing, I know somebody must have picked it up, but this is just an extension. Gets in and put it on drill, and then put your sanding disc on down here. It's for getting into vessels and stuff, getting down inside. A simple way, if you're using an extension, take a little piece of PVC, slide it over the shaft, and then as you're running, you hang onto the PVC. It's just a nice way of having a handle, and it gives you a lot more control with sanding. I have pneumatic drums and the ball for doing vessels and all different things. They tend to be really expensive because you're paying for the sleeves, and they don't last long. I have more problems. I'm always repairing those things. So seals go out of them. Ron Odegaard was taking and putting in a Schrader valve into the end of it. I break those all the time. It's one of those things that the pneumatic balls and sanders work well, but they're a lot of maintenance. So if I can get away with not using them, I do. I forget what those King Arthur, the pneumatic bowl thing now, they're up to, I think it's $11 for 2 or 3 sleeves. 11, 12 bucks. That's expensive. And if you hit the edge of a opening as you're sanding something, it's like that thing's gone in seconds. it's like, oh, geez.
There was a member of the Woodworking Guild that used a scroll sawer, and he made bowls on a scroll saw and sanded them to shape. There would be, you know, curves in them and all that. And he came up with a ball sander, and it's in his book. Him and the guy from Door County that's good now, Spielman, they wrote a book together. And it's like one of those pink rubber balls.
Yep.
And you cut it flat, you glue it on a spindle, and then he had a pattern that you would cut the sandpaper and then glue it to the wall. And
Yep.
it was made to overlap the right direction, so as it spun, it wouldn't go
Yep.
apart. And that's how he did all his inside curves.
Yep. And that's what I've done with one of those pneumatics is I glued Velcro on the outside of it and then take my 6-inch discs and cut, you know, and wrap it around. And they work, but now it's about that big around. So that's the hard part is in a vessel, you got to somehow get it in an opening. Hopefully there's a void you can get it in and then put it through your shaft through and get it all. But, you know, so there is tons and tons of different attachments for sanding, and, you know, I do. It's mainly just slowing down and spending time. These are, one thing that I actually like, I will show you, is these pads, and I've forgotten the name of them now. Yeah, these are, but, so here's your original pad. You put one of these interface pads on, and it saves, these are cheaper than buying a new, you know, foam-backed pad. So it's just a way of kind of extending the life and cheaper, saves you money. These discs I bought a while ago, and I bought thousands of them, which I would recommend to people not to do that, because now I've got these discs. These are part ceramic and I forget what else, but the glue now is breaking down. Yep. So they don't last. They, a few minutes, and the paper's coming off the front of the backing. So it didn't pay in the end. I saved money on the buying in bulk, but
But it has a shelf life on it.
yep. So I don't do any hand sanding. My random orbits, I think, have a 3/64 orbit. That's better than I can do by hand. They are, to me, they just work and work very well. Yeah, one of the common things with using pneumatics, because when I start out, I don't have an inline oiler. I put 3 drops of oil in, and what that does is it catches, the exhaust is right here. If you don't do that, you will have oil all over your piece. So I just put a little, bib on it, kind of, and that catches the oil, keeps it clean. So I got an 80-gallon. Yeah, they're air hogs. There's no doubt about it. They really do use a lot of air, and it's one of those things that's just part of the game. Compressor. It's amazing how in my shop, when my compressor starts running, how much heat it generates. So I look at it that way. In the wintertime, it's free heat, So, but.
Kelly, have you tried various manufacturers of sandpaper and found some better than others?
Yes, and it's one of those things is everybody, if you notice that, like Vince, every now and then he changes to the new best thing there is out. Well, yeah, but it's just advertising, and it's what he buys in bulk. All of a sudden he's got to sell a lot of it, so it's the best thing going. So I do, I personally like the gold paper. Is probably cheaper than most of the newer blends of different things, and it still cuts as good as anything. I forget what that gold is, but what's up, Don?
Where are you getting your pneumatic sanders? Where are you purchasing those?
I get them online a lot now. Dynabrade is the brand I like the best. But you're looking at about $125 a piece. The little Harbor Freight one, you can get these for about, with the coupons, down to about $25. They work. It works very well. You can get a 3-inch disc for on here. But, I've gone through a few of these. So it's what, again, like I say, I don't worry about time. I don't worry about cost. But I sell a lot of my work, so it makes it. That's one of those things that.
What about inertia sanders? Slower?
Yep, works. That's it. It's just slower. Yep. I'm trying to gain speed by using power. No doubt about it. And your inertia sanders. It's like the drill. You're always going to have concentric circles left behind when you're done sanding with anything that just rotates. That's why I like going to the random orbit in the end after I've done a few grits. The bowl is now smooth. The random orbit has got a pattern that you can't follow, like the concentric circle of an inertia sander or an electric drill without random orbit. And it's I don't know.
Are your better ones pretty much just auto body sanders?
They're they say they're designed for wood, so they aren't auto body. But I think it's pretty much same sander, really. You know, I don't know if they got a finer, a smaller, you know, rotation, whatever it's called. But yeah, I do. It's time for me is kind of irrelevant. It's worth your time and effort, I think, to just spend a little more time as you're sanding. So for me, like I say, that's pretty much it. Tim? Yep.
What do you use for your first coat on your utilitarian bowl?
I go with the Danish oil polyurethane blend. I kind of mix the two. And Danish oil, when I could get Deft, I used straight Deft Danish oil. But now almost all you can find is Watco, and Watco has no body to it at all, in my opinion. So that's why I add the poly to the Watco finish. And
Are you adding full strength poly, or are you adding the rub-on poly?
nope, full strength poly.
Full strength,
Yep.
okay. And so, what kind of a ratio do you got there?
Probably about a 50-50.
Oh,
It
okay.
you know, the
Substantial.
Watco is so thin that it thins down straight poly pretty well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of. You want this left on, Tim?
No.
You gonna be using it?
Take that off.
Oh, okay. Huh? Oh yeah.
Dry it.
Any clear wood finish, once it's cured, is food safe. And once that just means when the dryers have gone, you know, so it's no longer gassing off. It's food safe.
All yours, Tim.
All right. Well, taking off on that just a little bit more, this didn't turn out quite as polished as I was hoping, but it was kind of an interesting experiment. I turned all of these knobs out of, half of them were maple, half were cherry, and I sanded them to 150 in this column. This middle column is 220, and this last column is 320, and I put different finishes on them. So the top half is Danish oil next to water-based poly, and then down here is boiled linseed next to oil-based poly. And Kelly was talking about how that Watco is so thin. If you look at this one knob in the middle, they all had 3 coats, by the way. This one knob in the middle, actually, the grain was kind of vertical to my split on here, and it sucked that Danish oil right down through, and it's actually bled through where I didn't even paint it. So that's how, that's how that capillary action is working with the finish, and it'll actually go through. So it's good if you're using just your Danish. That shows that there's penetration through the whole bowl, that you're going to end up with, a better sealer on the grain, so that it's not impacted as much by water or food. But in this particular case, it kind of wrecked my example because I had the poly, the water-based poly underneath it. What I actually typed something up, and I'm going to have Terry post it on the group page. Maybe we could even send it we can route it like we would with the newsletter. But basically, it's my steps to try to get rid of the sanding marks. It works really good for me, and if you at least have a starting point on the different steps that you transition through to get your final finish, I think it'll help. And it's really simple. When your bowl is on the lathe, you're going to get all of these circular lines from your tool and from your sandpaper if you hold the sandpaper while the bowl turns, right? In order to get to your finish, it's easier to sand at 90 degrees to those marks and see when they're gone. So that's kind of what I'm going to be walking through here in a moment. But basically, you have your bowl, and in fact, I'm going to grab this one. I'll probably use this one right here. So you'll take your bowl, and it's going to be a little bit tough to see probably. You can see it pretty. Go back there once, Cleet. Yeah, can you see then the reflection? You can see the tool marks. And it just so happened that I had used the bowl gouge on this, and then I came through with a scraper, and then I just scraped the high points off because you have a little bit of a wave when you use your bowl gouge. You'll have high spots and low spots, and then the scraper will knock those off a little more quickly than your sandpaper will, so that's why I do it. And you can see these different ridges because some of it is cut nicely with the bowl gouge, and some of it is actually a scraper action, which is a real fine tear out, basically. But it is fine, and that'll sand off real easy when I get to it. And then on this side, I was just trying to get something that I could pass around, but I used my small little 2-inch circular sander, and I worked through I probably did like a 150 or 100, 150, 180, or 220 on here. So I didn't even actually spin it in between. But that's kind of what I'm going to walk through here. And we can pass that around and look at it. And you can pass this around as well.
It was stationary.
In this particular case, which is not typical for me.
Right.
Yeah. And then I'll let you grab this.
Kim, is this
Three.
came back out the end green
Yeah.
after? That's one of those things.
That's another good point because what Kelly's talking about is when you use the Danish oil and it soaks in, it looks really, it looks like it's working. And then you walk away and then it slowly bubbles back out. And as it bubbles back out, it will create like little droplets of thick Danish oil versus being absorbed by the wood grain. Does that make sense? And so then you have to go back and sand it and get rid of it. So the moral of the story is go back after probably 15 minutes, and then maybe if you soak it a lot, you should go back after about a half hour. And then just take a nice dry rag and then wipe that Danish oil back off because you don't want anything resting on the surface. So I got a small bowl here, and this will kind of help illustrate, the steps that I like to go through. My preference would be to turn a bowl and then leave the foot on, okay? And I like to sand the bowl while it's on the lathe as much as possible. If this is like a live edge bowl, quite often, and I have some other examples here, you can just grab those and start passing them around if you want. But you'll see that a lot of these are cut with just the tools, and then I will sand them while they're on the lathe and the wood is wet. And so I do that once in a while also. Typically, the wood's not soaking wet. So it's already, like let's say that butternut that's sitting up over here, it was cut down, and then maybe 3 months, 4 months later, I still have some big chunks. Well, when you cut into it, it's still wet. But it's not like it was, the first week after you drop the tree. So anyways, what I like to do is have something that I can hold on to. And there's 2 different ways to do it. This particular one, I used a large set of jaws. I knew that the grain was pretty wild on it, and so I left it thick. I left it, a little less than an inch. It's been drying. This one's been drying since October. What I'll end up doing with this, because I still have the point on here from the tailstock. So I'll take the tailstock and then I'll put it on here, like that, and then I'll actually turn this chuck again, retrue it, and I'll just use a smaller set of jaws on this piece of wood. But I think that the finishing starts at this point now because I want to have as nice of a surface and as few, the least amount of tear out as possible, and that's the last thing that you're going to be working on. And you can pass that around too. All right, I got to grab this. Actually, would somebody, yeah, would you do my heavy work, Kelly? I had hernia surgery 12 days ago. I can't lift for another couple of weeks. Thank you. All right, so this still has all the tool marks, and I think that's pretty obvious on the monitor there. And the tool marks are in a circular pattern with the bowl. What's that? So this was an old mouse pad, right? And I got all kinds of them, so it works pretty good. What did I just see though? Somebody was using leather on here too, and I think there was an advantage to that because it tends not to burnish as much as some of the rubbers. So kind of keep that in mind. If you were done sanding on the inside of your bowl, you don't want to do anything where the bowl gets stopped. The ring will actually burn in there a little bit. So again, I leave that piece on there. Oops, that one cracked a little bit. That one might be a mistake. Okay, so that's running pretty true. What happened on this particular one is the wood dried a lot, and where that little tiny point went in, I didn't even get the shoulder of the tailstock to hit the wood before the point on here actually split that. So I'll just have to be careful. But again, it's easier to have the lathe hold your bowl than it would be if you had it off the machine. So. Now Kelly talked about his pneumatic sanders. I don't use air. My compressor's not big enough to handle that. What I've kind of played around with is I do have a traditional drill, and I still use that at home. Typically, I have it hooked up to that cable, and actually, I'll grab this cleat. And then I have it hanging, so it's kind of a flexible shaft sander. And this works real good when you're trying to reach, like a narrow vessel, a real narrow bowl or something, because there's nothing that prevents, or very little, that prevents you from getting a good angle on the insides of those. So this I actually use quite a bit. My go-to sander for the outside of bowls is this one. And if you just think of geometry, we have an outside curve here. The closer you can come to that same curve, the easier it is to blend all of your tool marks. So if you're using a small little 2-inch, you can still sand that all down, but if you're trying to get that nice graceful curve, the more sandpaper that you can contact with that, the better off it'll turn. I made a rocking chair once, and when you cut the rockers on those, you cut them on a bandsaw, and then they're pretty jagged. And so what I ended up doing is I took the scrap piece, which was, what would that be? That'd be like almost the female part of that curve, and I double-face taped sandpaper on there. And then I rubbed the two of them together like this, and the curve just came out beautifully. And so that's the concept if you're trying to blend in a curve, is try to get the two surfaces that match really well like that. So what I'm going to do is I'll just sand like half of this, and then you'll see how it was when I started, and then you'll see what how it went. This is another thing that I made. I've had these here before. I actually brought in a couple and threw them in the store, but this is like a $4 or $5 3M sanding pad at Fleet Farm, and then I just bought some craft foam I use contact cement. It's kind of that messy stuff in a can. Scrape, you scratch up the rubber, give it a rough surface, put a coat on, put a light coat on the foam, and stick it on there. And then you end up with the foam, which is just placed just like this. And then you go to the art and craft show or a store, and you get that fixative. So if you've ever done pencil or charcoal drawings, what they'll do is they spray this clear fixative over the top. So when the artist puts their hand on it again to draw, it's sealed, right? And that stuff actually works really good to kind of seal this foam. And then the adhesive pads here stick to it just fine for doing your sanding. So it works out good. And again, what's that?
How did you cut the foam?
Oh, that was the easy part. Then I just put this in the drill, and I have a sander, and I just turned it, and I sand it off the edge. It goes really quick. Yeah, it goes really quick. So again, on the outside, this is a really good tool for me. And Mike asked before, what part of this sandpaper do you use? I always try to use like half of it, right? Because you don't want to have conflicting directions when you're putting it on the wood. So the minute I go past center, the revolution is, the turning is going the other way, and then that makes it harder to control. So if you can keep like the top half, the left half, the right half, you'll have pretty good results. And then, go ahead.
And then, so you stay with the grain?
Yep.
Essentially, or do you go cross grain?
I like staying with the grain, and so Kelly's wrong. No, but what I found out was you can actually see the difference, right? And it doesn't make a difference, but when you hold up your lights, is this thing on? When you hold up your light to the wood, to me, it just helps me see that I've sanded there already. It doesn't really have as much to do with the quality of the finish as it does, did I sand it? If that makes sense.
One of those things you can do too is take denatured alcohol or even water to wipe the surface of your piece down. If you think you're done sanding, a
Yep.
lot of times it's amazing what you don't see because it's filled up with sawdust.
Yeah. That okay? Oops, I turned it off. It's not, well, I guess that shows okay. It works better for my eyes. It might not be as obvious on the monitor though. All right, so I'm gonna use half of the pad, and I'm actually gonna try to use the rotation that's pulling down across the top or with the grain. Okay. And my objective is to keep, I like turning the lathe like this so I can keep the wood moving, and then I am trying to rotate the sander as well. Now on this bowl, and again I'm only going to sand half so you'll see it, I have what I would call like a hump or a ridge right about here, and I know why it's there because this is where I started to have full contact while I was turning the bowl. So in other words, my tool actually was engaged with the wood for 360 degrees. And prior to that, I was cutting the wings. I was cutting just the high spots. And so, I just have a tendency when you're cutting through the air, you're trying to do something, and then all of a sudden you hit solid wood, and then you have the feel all the time, and you can just kind of carve it out. So, it's just a hazard of the bowl. It takes you a while to get a good feel for how to do that, and that's why it's there. But what I'll do is I'm going to hold this pad again, probably like right at 90 degrees, and I'm going to sand that off first, and then I'll be blending in the rest. What's that?
Do you wear a respirator or anything?
Yeah, actually, the story is I had a chronic cough 4 out of the last 5 years. And doctor couldn't figure out what it was, and he's giving me heartburn medication and all this stuff. And once I started wearing a respirator in my shop, I no longer have my chronic cough. So I actually wear it a lot now, and I just have the paper masks with the valve on it right now. I did purchase that big helmet, the Trend. Was it a Trend? Yep, and it's really good, but it's got the motor up on the head, and you can kind of feel that. It's kind of this whining air fan, and it kind of drives me nuts. If I had a choice, I'd love to have the same helmet, and maybe just the motor, like with a hose and the motor on the back or something. But the breeze is nice inside. It keeps you nice and cool. If you're in a real dusty environment, it's nice, and it protects you as well. But
That's it. And I meant to,
Yep.
the one thing I forgot was I wear one of the little dusty guns.
oh, okay,
And it's the cloth mask. It's not paper, but cloth.
yeah.
It's amazing how much of a difference it makes.
Yeah, and I would cough all winter long, and I just didn't want to admit it was my hobby, you know. Okay, what I'd like to do right now is just kind of stop, and in all honesty, I'd like to pass this around because I'm not saying that this is done with this grit. But it's almost done with this grit. I would probably spend a little more time up on the lip. But the key here is that all of the marks, the bulk of the marks right through here, are going to now be at 90 degrees, right? So I can actually see on here that I missed the edge, that there's a little bit of a line. Oops, I'm sorry. I should go this way. So on the edge here, you'll see, and actually it's discolored because it oxidized. There's a little bit of oxidation over here, but if you look at it, all of the lines now are coming radially off of the axis, and I just find that really easy to identify that I'm done with with that grit when all of the circular ones are completed. No, I haven't. I really haven't used them. I haven't. I tried it once and just ended up not, doing it again. I don't use them. All right, I'm gonna get this one back in circulation here because it's ready. So this one, if you looked at it at all, what I tried to do is show you that, here's what the bowl looked like, just with tools. Okay, so it was my bowl gouge and light scraping. And then I did sand this with the circular sander, and that would have been my small drill. And this is what I picked up. I just happen to be kind of a Milwaukee fan, and I have multiple different tools that all use the same batteries. So when I saw that this one is actually it's a buffer sander, I picked it up because of its size and its weight, and it works pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just walk through the normal steps that I would go through with this bowl, and you can pass that other thing around and check that out. This one won't split, hopefully. Again, I do have I still have the foot on here, and that'll help facilitate holding the bowl and sanding it. I'll try to sand like 80% of the bowl, everything I can, while the foot is still on, and then I will take and I'll cut the tenon off, and then I will do whatever it takes to sand and get that cleaned up. Let's see, where did I see the? Here it is. Good question. So the question was, do I wax all my bowls? And Kelly and I were talking earlier. I've actually gotten more successful with with minimizing failures and cracks on bowls, you know, over the years, I used to lose at least 50% of them. So half of the bowls that I would turn would crack. And I was always trying to figure out what I did wrong. If I have like a live edge bowl, I try to turn it to final thickness. And then I just bag it like Kelly did with this one. Sometimes I'll put 2 bags on it, paper bags, and I'll try to date it. If you're really interested in that turning out, you're going to want to check it, right? So I would, in fact, Kelly's got some green stuff on there now. So you will get mold on them, on some of them if you're not, you know, if you don't watch. So you can minimize the mold if you change your paper bag every 2 or 3 days. The minute you see the mold kind of coming in, just change the bag, and you could minimize it. This is going to be thick enough that it's probably not an issue. You'll be able to turn all that off. But that's what I do with a lot of the bowls is paper bags. This particular one was an ash burl I got, and it is really a gorgeous piece of wood. And I have the best success waxing it 100%, and then I just shelf it for 6 to 12 months with all totally waxed. If I have any emotion invested in that piece of wood at all, that's the most successful that I've found.
Does that turn green before you?
Yes, I turned it green. Yep.
You just dipped it in oil?
No, I have a gallon with a paintbrush, and I just spread it on with the paintbrush.
What kind of wax?
That's anchor seal. Yeah, so
I could have swore I had wax on the end grain of this one, but it feels like I don't.
yeah, it doesn't look. I don't know. Doesn't look like it. Yep.
You know, time will tell, but you mentioned anchor seal. I tried the wall primer, I put thing on Facebook a couple of months ago like that. And it looks so far like everything I put it on is doing a good job of sealing it. I
Oh.
haven't seen any cracking. The stuff goes for $10 a gallon.
Versus 25.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of hurts when I have to buy a new gallon of wax, but
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
5-gallon jug from the company is a lot cheaper. Ship it right now. You can get the original anchor seal too, not just the anchor seal.
okay. Yeah, actually, that would be good. You know, I thought about getting a big one and then maybe breaking it down and bringing a milk jug, and you could split the cost on some. A gallon actually lasts me probably almost 2 years. Yeah, I mean it goes quite a ways.
We've actually talked about getting a 55-gallon drum for the club. If there's people that would be interested in taking a gallon, and see if we can't get a price break on it. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So going down that same path, I would typically. I guess I don't really need this, but I'm not going to turn the foot off yet. So right now I would have had the tool marks still in here. And, you know, maybe for grins, maybe I won't even bother sanding this other half. I'm not gonna, because I think you'll actually see, you'll see how it, if you don't sand, if you don't sand with that 80 grit and get rid of all the tool marks, you cannot get rid of them later. That's the key, right? So I'm gonna leave them on here, and we'll just turn this bowl, and we'll go through the progression. So again, assuming that you had the radial, or excuse me, that I took the sander, and right now I've gone to 320 with this drill, and I buffed kind of half of it out. So I got to grab my sandpaper. Yeah, right. Well, and the other thing too, which is kind of funny, I did demos here before, and I chose bad wood. So when you use hard, really hard wood, everything takes longer, right? So when Kelly brought his maple bowl, yeah, he's like, yeah, you ain't gonna sand through that and have everybody watch you. But this butternut actually sands very quickly. It's beautiful wood to work with. If you ever have a chance, I would recommend that you work with butternut, and it goes fast. So it's not gonna be the tools or the sandpaper. It's actually the wood that's gonna contribute the most to the lack of sanding. So I got 120 grit here, and that should be fine. So I like to turn between 300 and 500 RPM when I'm sanding. You don't want to get too much heat. Well, what you'll do is you go back on the lathe after you run your drill or your power sander and use the same grit. So if you start out with 80 and you're using that on your drill, then take that same it can be the piece that you take right off of the drill. And then in fact I could do that. I'll just take it right off of here. And then you sand until all of those small 90-degree circular marks are gone. And now all of a sudden we have a new set of marks on your wood that you can gauge your next grit against. And that's the key. Because if you're going to be sanding with 80 grit, and then you spin it like this with 80 grit, and then you go to 100, how many of you can tell me for sure that that line is a 100 grit mark versus an 80 grit mark? And you can't. But by going 90 degrees to it, it becomes very easy. So what we're going to end up with on this bowl is I'm going to have the half that I had sanded previously will end up kind of falling in line the way it should. And then I'm hoping, in all honesty, that the half that I didn't do the 80 grit on will actually have tool marks still in it when I'm done. So now, can you let's see here? I wonder if there's a way to, maybe right here? Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to assume that I'm done with that grit because I went circular first, and now I spun it on the lathe again, and now I have the what would that be? The not circular rings, but the yeah. So now let's see, what was that? That was actually 120. Okay, now I'm going to use 150 grit, and that'll be on my drill. And I actually should have marked this. So what I'm going to do is on the one half without the, actually I'm going to overlap it. I'll go half and half. I'll take all of these these lathe hand sanding marks right off with the 150 grit. Now the bright light will help you a lot. I actually pushed a little too hard on that because I can see it now that I have some deep gouges in that'll be a bear to take out as I go. But most of my hand sanding marks are gone. And everything is from the pad now. And I try to do it, if you can use the top or the bottom when you're addressing it, they'll come at 90 degrees and they'll wipe those out, the previous marks. I'm good with that. So then what I'll do then is, that was 150. I'll take 150 again. Get up to about 500 speed. I'm wondering if I shouldn't turn that on. Is the dust going all over, or is it not too bad? So now I've gone through 2 grits, right? And I've used the tool with the circular pad, and I've done the hand sanding with the lathe on. And I think I got rid of most of those pad marks again. So then I would just go to the next finer grit. And again, this is going pretty fast. Like Kelly says, he spends time on the lathe and he doesn't worry about it. And I think that's pretty typical. You kind of get in that zone, you just kind of keep going, and the relaxation of the work kind of takes over. And again, the reason I leave the foot on here is I go through the same process on the inside, and as long as the tenon is still in place, then the lathe can hold my bowl. And then once you get through that first grit, like Kelly starts with 80, I don't think you need to start with 80 on something as soft as the butternut. But I think I was doing 100, 120. The sanding goes quicker after you spend time with that first grit. If you didn't do that, then every time you change grits, you're still trying to get a couple of those 80 or 100 grit sanding marks off of there. What's that?
How long do you use those pads?
You can, these particular ones actually kind of turn color when they get wore out, so it's pretty easy to see that the orange will go away. Oops. I can get it underneath there otherwise. You can turn that back. Yeah. It's a little too bright. You can see kind of that they're orange, right? And they go pretty fast. But I also use the Abranet. Yeah, and that works really good with these sanders. The nice part about it is all that swarf, all the sand, the dust and stuff gets pulled away real quick. And you can do some serious removal, and it lasts a lot longer. And you don't even have to cut them circular either. That's the drill.
If you're not seeing sawdust coming off, you're done with that grit pretty much.
Okay. So I'm going to, again, I'm only doing half of it, so I'm going to call this half done because now all of my sanding marks are from this pad and they're going pretty much perpendicular to the hand sanding marks. When make sure I remember what that one was. Oh. I'm sorry, what?
When you end the piece sanding, you ending it with a pad or you?
What I like to do is when I'm all done, I actually use my hand with it off of the lathe. Okay? Because that if you're really trying to get rid of the marks, there's nothing better than taking, you know, the piece of sandpaper in your hand and saying, oh yeah, on this side of the bowl, I can sand this way, right? And then you go 180 degrees and those are gonna come out real nice and easy. And they'll blend, any sandpaper marks will blend in the grain beautifully. And I do that on the bottom as well. So you find the direction of the grain and you take that and you go with. And then on the end grain, you may have to play around a little bit, maybe a little bit of orbital, you know, sanding. But I always try to, you know, take a little bit of that off. And, you know, I really haven't made too many utilitarian bowls. And so I probably sand much finer than what Kelly does. If he's, you know, if you're not, and you're knocking all those, you know, a lot of those away. So, all right, so that was 220.
What's the soonest you can recoat with Danish oil? How long do you have to wait?
As soon as I do what with?
Recoat with Danish oil.
You know, it kind of depends on what you're doing. So if I'm going through my steps, I will probably recoat once in a while if it's real nice drying weather, maybe 2 days, 3 days. But typically I get the best results if I wait 3-4 days to a week. And then if I'm gonna buff my Danish oil, I let it sit for like 2 to 4 weeks. Because there's been a lot of the bowls that I've put Danish oil in and I've waited a week. And you don't realize that the first time you saturated it, right? And then it looks like it's dry, and then I saturate it again. And it's still curing in there. You apply the buffing wheel to it, it heats it up, and it'll bubble out. And you actually get those little droplets again that'll come to the surface. So I don't know what you run into, but 2 to 4 weeks is pretty typical for me.
It's just what Tim was saying. It surface dries first, so everything underneath has to dry. That's sealed off because of the wood. So it takes time to dry and cure.
Yep.
And I remember I did a floor one time, and unreal. It was like 2 months before I went back in and painted this. It was a dining room. And I painted the walls in that dining room where I had done the floor a couple months earlier. And all of a sudden went back in there. Actually, I got a call from the customer. The floor had expanded from the moisture in the paint on the walls. And it pushed beads of uncured polyurethane up in the cracks. It was a disaster. I had to redo the floor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was months after I had done it, so, and it wasn't near cured, so.
Yep. All right, so that was 220 grit. And just for grins, this isn't going to be a real thorough sanding. Thought I had 320. No. Actually, would you see if there's a scissors in one of those blue boxes? It's yep, thank you. So again, I like the Abernet. I'll just pop it on here like this and cut a chunk off. So I took this to, again, I'll be taking this to 320, and I'm trying to sand the same half all the way through, and so that when I finish with my hand sanding on the drill, I guess I'll call it, or when I'm finished with this circular motion, you'll be able to see kind of the remnants from the heavier grain, from the coarser sandpaper. So I have 320 marks in here going 90 degrees to the spinning of the lathe. And I'm going to call this my last sanding. I'll do the 320 in a circle pattern with the lathe spinning, or the lathe spinning by hand. You know, I mean, just look at all and it just leaves real quick. It's just gone. This stuff is nice. The other thing I like about this is I'll take it and use it for applying the finish. So I've used wet dry sandpaper, but if you don't have any, you can take like the 320, the 400, the 600, they all work. And I dip it into my Danish oil, and I'll use circular motion when I apply it, and then you can actually, you know, get rid of some more sanding marks as you're applying the finish. And it's worked out really well when I want to buff that piece at the end, when I'm trying to get rid of the marks. Because that hand sanding, you know, it's labor intensive, but it works just as good as those random orbit sanders because your hand very seldom repeats the exact same motion. So, let's see here. I wonder if it's going to show. So what I had on the bottom of this, this was the mark that I had. I originally had it taped off. So where it says sand, this is where I had sanded all of the tool marks off ahead of time. And then I came back and we walked through all of the different grits that you just observed. And then on the top half here, only got sanded with what you've observed me sanding, but I focused on you know, cutting the two. I tried to split it from the two arrows, if that makes sense to you. So even though the bottom half, oh boy, how's that? The bottom half here is where I had sanded ahead of time. What I sanded in front of you was from here to here. And like here, you know, you can see the marks. Over here, in all honesty, those marks almost disappear. And I think, I almost guarantee you it's because we didn't go through the same progression of sanding 90 degrees. So again, where this half circle is, this was what I just did, where I alternated spinning it on the lathe, sanding by hand, and then the same grit, I'll do it with the small sander. And again, this gets to like the 320. You don't have to sand it down to 320. I mean, that's something that is going to be a personal preference. Just a couple more plugs maybe for some of the tools that I use. Kelly was using these too, and I was kind of like, yeah, I like this a lot. So this is 3M, And actually, I'm going to grab. Put that in there. So 3M makes this, what do they call it? Roll lock, I think it's called. And you can get other brands as well. I'd be a little hesitant with the other brands only because these work so well. If you use an off brand, they might not have the same flatness. They might not spin as true. And I've heard by reading the reviews like on Amazon.com that some of them will actually loosen up. But there's a small little nib on the base plate, and Kelly actually had some foam bases with Velcro on them. What I did is I went to Fleet Farm and I bought 3M, and these are actually sanding discs, and they work really good on metal. You know, if you wanted to, like I used them on a hammer, the face of a hammer. I was pounding some rivets down, and I wanted them to be nice and smooth. So I just took one of these on my drill and buffed that metal down. Worked out really good. So you could use those for cleaning up metal. I took the glue, the contact cement, and I just applied it to the face of this basically Scotch-Brite. And I glued on, was that about a 1/2 inch? This was just carpet foam, carpet backing. And then what you can get at some of the, actually, this doesn't help anymore, does it? What you can get at the fabric stores is Velcro. Gene's probably got a whole bunch of this from his military uniforms. Just kidding. But this is used for putting patches on your uniforms and then be able to peel the patches off, so it's 2 inches wide or more. And then you can just cut that and glue it on here, and you'll have a 2-inch piece, and I sand it off, just like I told you before. You can put it on the lathe, you could put it on your drill, and then if you have a power belt sander or something, it takes it off in a hurry. And now this fits all of my little sleeves, which you've seen before, the little 2-inch circles. What I've been doing to bridge the gap is I also have 5-inch orbital sanders that use the hook and loop. And I'll actually cut little circles out of here when I run out. So that's where I'm at today. Is I'm missing a lot of pre-cut sanding discs. But this is great, and I'm going to make a couple more of these and probably just leave the sanding disc on the foam until it's used up, and then I'll just have different foams or different pieces. And I wanted 150. And then you go like that and you pull it off. The Velcro will last longer, the foam will last longer because you're not peeling it off and stuff like that. And that's usually what happens when the foam breaks down and goes to heck on you. It's because you're trying to get the old sandpaper off. I'm trying to think if there was something else. Again, I like putting the bowl on the lathe. And if you start between centers when you're roughing it out, then you'll have that mark. I know a lot of people will actually start their bowl and they'll put them on a faceplate. And so what I did was I just turned a plug that's the same size as the hole on my faceplate, and it fits in there nice and snugly. And then I have a rod, and I drilled a hole in the middle of the plug, and then I'll just take that and I'll tap it, and then I get the mark on the bottom of my bowl so that I know where to put the tailstock in, and then you don't have to, fart around with trying to find center and making sure that you're doing that. I don't know, that was probably it. Any questions? Yeah, Pete.
When you use Abernet, do you put a backing pad in there so you don't sand off the little stickies for your Velcro?
I put it directly. I think this is the answer. So you just asked if what I put on there to prevent getting, so that the Abernet continues to adhere.
It's so thin, you're taking that way down to thickness of the Abernet.
Yeah, I have not had that issue with the Velcro that I've been using. So I've been able to wear out the Abernet long before the loops on the back give way to the to the pad. So, that could be. Yeah, don't get it, don't get it too hot. Kelly said it early, and I have to, reinforce that. Don't push hard with the 80 grit and the 100 grits, because those will be I'll call them the stray marks that'll occur on there, and you won't get those out. You get, press lightly. The other thing is when you're using 80 grit, it has a tendency to feel like there's still a lot of cut left on it because it is so thick, but it wears out almost as fast as, the 220. So when you don't grab a new sheet of 80 or 100 grit, feel how sharp it is with your fingers, and don't be afraid to get rid of that 80 grit that you've used already, even though it feels sticky. That's good for sanding body work on your car.
Use like somebody else paid for it.
Yep. Use it like somebody else is buying your sandpaper.
You had talked about, the glue was wearing out on, you bought a bunch of sandpaper. You can go to the craft store and they have
Yeah. So Terry was just talking about the glue and the sandpaper, and I actually bought a lot of these little discs. Here, I'll put it by my face. Now, when I bought them, they were flat, and then as they dry out, like Kelly was saying, they'll curl up on you. And there's two issues. One is when I put them on my foam pad, they tend to make the foam pad curl. And the other thing is that, they just don't last as long because the chemicals in there are basically drying out. So I probably won't be buying them in bulk as much as anymore either. But I bought a lot of the sandpaper for that big disc, that 5-inch one that I made with that Fleet Farm thing. And I mean, look what happens to this now. And this will stick on there okay, but I've actually had some issues with some of the heavier ones, especially like the 80, 100 grits. They'll curl so much that you can't get them to lay down because the paper's heavier. So
Where do you buy that at?
I bought my sandpaper online. Klingspor, I think, is this stuff. They had pretty good prices. I probably will continue to buy it by a box. I didn't bring a box, but I think it comes like 100 discs in a roll. You can also get the same ones. The adhesive is cheaper than the hook and loop. But like here's an example. Here's an example of the ones that are individually packaged. They're not on a roll. And this is a 220, and it curls pretty good. I'll still use these, but I'll probably throw them away a lot quicker than I used to.
What if you put a piece of wood on them or something like that?
Yeah, that'd probably help. Keep them clamped. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Put them underneath your truck tire or whatever.
All right.
After final sanding, do you ever wet the wood down and then knock it down again before you put the finish on?
I have, but I don't do that very often anymore. It really helps as you do this the first few times, but I think you can get comfortable enough watching your sanding marks and then changing your two different methods, and that when you get down there, you're going to be sitting pretty good. Yeah, Jack.
Just I was mentioning that as far as like so when you put your first wet finish on, I don't know if anyone's ever had that where you get it all done and sanded, you put your first wet finish over the top. After it dries, you're like, well, it's all like fuzzy. You got to knock it all back down. I've had really good luck where I'll mist it with a little bit of water, let it dry,
Okay.
and then go back over with that finish sanding that I just did. Then when I put your first coat of your liquid finish on, the grain's already been raised and knocked down, and it's not going to fuzz back up on you, and you don't have to go through so many layers of finish to get it smooth again.
Yeah, that's a good practice. Yep.
Kind of where the
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I use sanding sealer for.
That's one of the things with butternut you'll have a big problem with. You almost have to get a coat of sealer on there of some sort, because it'll fuzz every time. I like to put a little bit on before I take it.
Okay. What is everybody using for sanding sealer?
I use nylon cellulose sanding sealer, and it seems to fill.
And-
It's got a pretty strong odor, so the gas on it takes a while.
I use DEF 50/50. 50% DEF, 50% wiper thinner.
Okay.
Use engines with denatured alcohol.
So the shellac. Okay.
So the Mylands, I think, is a lacquer.
I think that's lacquer based, yeah. So there's 3 different kinds there: lacquer based, shellac, and then the oil mineral spirits based, right?
Well,
Is it deft?
yeah, DEF, yeah. It's
Deft what though? Deft.
lacquer.
Oh, deft lacquer. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Clear wood finish.
They use water on a lot of wood, but not on butter. Butter is still fuzzy.
Yeah. I guess I bought this drill a while back. I found that I can, use this with the different size pads on it, the 2-inch, the 3-inch, the 5-inch, and it's easily controlled with one hand. It is what it is, but the weight kind of keeps it in place. When I use my drill, I find it's kind of a two-handed operation. My wrist isn't strong enough to hold the whole drill and finish sanding the bowl. But there's a lot of people that use the drills, traditional drills. I saw a video on YouTube where a guy actually has, 5 or 6 of the same exact drill, Makita drill, and he's got them all holstered, and he goes 100, 150, 220, 320, and they all have a different grid on them, and he just grabs them and sands, and then he flips it off. So he's taken the pad, to an extreme, and actually bought different motors. I have that strategy with my routers. I won't be done buying routers until I have one router for every bit. But I haven't gotten that way with the sanders yet. That's my wife says, why are you buying another router? Don't you have some? And I go, well, yeah, but I got like 10 more bits I got to get a motor for. And then I don't use this often, but it's come in real handy. And this is just a small little sanding disc. And, it would work good if you were trying to not run over the edge on like the base of a bowl. I've used it inside of small narrow vases or vessels. Basically, I just took, this screw is, I thought I was using those carriage heads, so they got smooth head, but they got the square shoulders. And drilled a hole in a little bit of plywood and snugged it up tight with a nut. And then I just glued the foam on there, and this particular one, I should glue on a nice piece of Velcro, but at the time I didn't have what I was looking for. And this still works just fine, because it doesn't have a lot of torque on it, and it works good to get into those small areas, and almost costs nothing.
Doing the bases, chuck your sanding stem in the drill press, and you got 2 hands on your bowl.
Oh. So yeah, Mark just said he uses a drill press. He'll chuck his sanding disc in the drill press, and he has 2 hands free to hold onto the bowl and sand. That's a really good idea. And another little thing, I don't know if you saw when I passed these around, but because I've made this mistake in the past, when I'm using my tool and I get to the bottom, I always intentionally leave a little hump, because they're easier to sand off than if you have a little dimple when you get to the bottom, and then you have to sand around that to make it smooth. So it's easy to leave a bump, and this is anywhere from a 1/4 inch to maybe a 1/2 of an inch wide in here, and you can feel them on a lot of these bowls when they go through. But a disc will take that off real quick and nice and smooth. You can use the edge and blend it in and without any problems. Yep. Yeah, the dimples will haunt you forever. So, all right. Well, that's all I had. Thank you. All right. Thank you.